The music was still echoing through the glittering hall when the sting of humiliation hit me harder than the champagne. My father's words cut like a knife, Caleb's smirk only twisting it deeper, and then out of nowhere the slap. It cracked across my cheek like a rifle shot, followed by the sharp yank of my hair as I was dragged out of the party. For a moment, the laughter around me felt like it belonged to another world, a world I had never been allowed to belong to. My name is Celine, the family's forgotten freelancer, invisible among their so-called real professionals. If stories of injustice and cold revenge grip you, stay with me and don't forget to subscribe for more true tales of justice. It's strange how pain can become so familiar that you almost stop noticing it. That night at the party wasn't the first time my father's hand had found my face. It was just the first time he did it with an audience. I had been shoved into walls before, called ungrateful when I asked for the smallest things, told I was lucky to even have a roof over my head and food on the table. Those words carried more weight than fists sometimes. They were heavy enough to remind me I didn't quite belong. Not in this family, not in their world. I used to believe the small moments would save me, that maybe kindness could slip through the cracks if I tried hard enough. But the memories I carried weren't of warmth, they were of absence. When I was 8, I brought home a painting from school. It was just messy watercolors, the kind every kid brings home, but I was proud of it. I imagined it hanging in the hallway like a badge of belonging. My mother took one look and said the colors didn't match the decor. She set it aside like it was nothing. And I remember feeling like maybe I was nothing too. At 16, when dreams start to take shape, I whispered that I wanted to study art, to live in a world where creativity meant more than titles or bank accounts. My father laughed. Not in the gentle way a dad should laugh at a teenager's whims, but with a sharp edge that cut through me. Art doesn't put food on the table, he sneered. Pick something real. The message was clear. My dreams were disposable, laughable even, as long as they didn't fit into his narrow vision of success. Then came my 25th birthday, a milestone I thought might finally mean something. I'd worked hard, paid my bills, carved out a quiet life as a freelancer, even if no one in my family respected that word. Caleb, my brother, didn't even bother to show up or call. My parents sent a text that could have been copied and pasted from a calendar reminder. I bought myself a cake, lit a candle, and sat alone in my apartment with the sound of traffic for company. I tried to convince myself it was enough, but deep down, it burned that the people who were supposed to know me best didn't seem to know me at all. Those moments stack up like bricks in a wall. Each insult, each dismissal, each silence hardened something inside me. By the time that party rolled around, I was already carrying decades of bruises, most of them invisible. When my father slapped me in front of everyone, it wasn't just the shock of the moment, it was the echo of every time he had told me I was worthless. Every time my mother had turned away, every time Caleb had looked right through me. What people at that party didn't understand was that I wasn't just humiliated that night. I was exposed. All the cracks I had been patching with quiet endurance were suddenly on display under glittering chandeliers and mocking laughter. And in that exposure, I felt something shift. Pain no longer felt like a cage I had to live in. It began to feel like evidence, proof that I wasn't crazy for believing I had been wronged all along. That's the cruel beauty of betrayal. It forces you to relive every slight, every wound, every moment you tried to convince yourself it wasn't so bad. But once you finally see it for what it is, there's no going back. You stop asking for love in a house that only offers cruelty, and you start planning for the day when you won't just endure, but rise. The irony of family is that the people who are supposed to protect you are often the ones who cut the deepest. Caleb had always been the golden child, the center of every spotlight, the one whose missteps were dressed up as charm, and whose smallest victories were celebrated as triumphs. He was decorated, beloved, effortlessly magnetic, at least that's how my parents told it. From the outside, he shined. And if he shined, that meant I had to fade. That night in the hall, glittering with chandeliers and polished marble, the favoritism was no longer whispered. It was paraded. Caleb walked through the room like royalty, guests circling him with laughter and praise, while I stood at the edge of it all like an afterthought, a misplaced guest in my own bloodline. My calls had been ignored for months. My name had been left off the seating chart entirely, and now I was meant to smile as if none of it cut me. But betrayal has a way of sharpening the air. You can feel it before it lands. Then it came. My father's hand across my face cracked like a rifle shot, silencing even the music for a heartbeat. My cheek burned, but the real fire spread deeper, into the hollow of my chest where shame bloomed faster than pain. He dragged me toward the doors like I was garbage, like I had no right to breathe the same air as their carefully curated circle of 73 guests. My heels scraped the marble, the sound drowned out only by something worse, the high, sharp laughter of my mother, floating behind me like glass shattering. And then came the applause. Not from the crowd, not from the horrified silence I wished for, but from one person, Caleb, my brother, my betrayer. That clap echoed louder than the slap. It was approval, dismissal, and ridicule wrapped into one. In that moment, he wasn't just the golden child. He was the executioner, validating everything my father had done, everything my mother had chosen to laugh at. The three of them, united, standing against me under the warm glow of chandeliers, while I was reduced to nothing more than entertainment for their evening. The humiliation was suffocating. 73 pairs of eyes watched as I was hauled toward the exit, and not one hand reached out to stop it. Not one voice rose to say it was wrong. I wasn't injured beyond bruises, but my chest ached with something heavier than physical pain. It was the weight of knowing that the shame would not leave me, that it had been planted inside me like a seed years ago and was now flowering in front of strangers. Memories came rushing in, cruel reminders that this wasn't new, it was simply louder. I thought of being shoved into walls as a teenager, hearing my father call me ungrateful when I asked for the smallest kindness. I thought of my mother, who never defended me, who would rather laugh than risk her place beside him. I thought of Caleb, who once promised to look out for me, then ignored my birthday, my calls, my very existence. Those wounds had been stitched over with silence, but the stitches ripped open that night, leaving me exposed in a way that was impossible to ignore. What cut the most wasn't the slap, the dragging, or even the applause. It was the realization that I had been set up to fail from the very beginning. In their eyes, Caleb's shine required my dimming. His success demanded my erasure, and their unity thrived on my exclusion. My family didn't just tolerate my suffering, they orchestrated it, applauded it, dressed it up as justice for the crime of being less than their favorite. Standing outside in the cold air after being thrown out, my face still burning, I wanted to crumble. The despair was thick, sticky, clinging to me like tar. But beneath the despair, something else stirred. Anger. Not the wild, screaming kind, but the deep, searing anger that runs quiet and steady. The kind that doesn't just wound, it fuels. The unfairness of it all twisted in my gut until it hardened into something unbreakable. I couldn't change the past, couldn't rewrite the childhood where my art was mocked, where my voice was silenced, where my very existence was treated as a blemish on their perfect picture. But what I could do, what I knew in that moment I would do, was change the story moving forward. I would not be their scapegoat forever. The party had been meant to humiliate me publicly, to remind me that I was disposable. Instead, it became the catalyst. As I stood there in the night, mascara streaked and heart pounding, I realized they had shown me the truth so clearly I couldn't look away. My family didn't want me. They never had. And that clarity, as cruel as it was, gave me something I hadn't felt before: permission. Permission to stop begging for love. Permission to stop accepting scraps. Permission to take my pain and turn it into something else. The conflict wasn't just about a slap or a laugh or an applause. It was about the years of favoritism that crowned Caleb, while suffocating me. The pattern of betrayal that culminated in that single moment of spectacle. And in that conflict, I found the spark of resolve. Betrayal had broken me down for years, but now it was about to build me into something new. Because once you realize you've been cast as the family's shadow, you have two choices: keep living in the dark, or step into your own light, no matter how blinding it might be for the ones who tried to keep you small. The night air still clung to my skin like a second punishment when I whispered the words that would change everything. "It ends tonight." Saying it aloud made it real, heavier than all the silences I had endured. For the first time in years, my voice wasn't trembling. It was steady, sharp, and alive with a decision I could no longer put off. I wasn't going to wait for my family to soften. They had made it clear they would never see me as anything but disposable. But disposable people don't fight back, and I was about to. The first call I made was to Dana. She and I hadn't spoken in months. Not since life pulled us into different orbits, but I knew she would answer. Dana had always been the kind of person who saw through the surface, who spotted cracks in walls no one else noticed. More importantly, she knew contracts, trusts, the legal threads that families like mine tied around their wealth to make it look untouchable. When she heard my voice, Dana didn't hesitate. I barely got through the story of what had happened at the party before her tone hardened. "Enough," she said flatly. "If you're serious about ending it, we're not doing this halfway. Send me everything you have: birth certificates, old bank statements, any letter with your name on it. They've been using your silence as cover. No more silence." Her words were gasoline to the spark already burning inside me. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in the fight. The second call was harder. Rick wasn't a friend in the traditional sense. He was a former cop I had once met during a freelance assignment. He carried the weight of someone who had seen too much but refused to look away. He owed me a favor, though I never thought I'd cash it in. Still, when I explained what was happening, Rick didn't need convincing. "I'll dig," he said simply. "You deserve the truth, and they're not going to give it willingly." Waiting for Rick's results was agony. Each day stretched long, filled with memories I didn't want but couldn't escape. But beneath the ache, something was shifting. I was no longer replaying my family's cruelty as if it defined me. I was preparing to expose it. That shift, subtle but powerful, was the turning point. When Rick finally called back, his voice carried the weight of revelation. "You were right," he told me. "I've traced the trust fund your grandfather left for your education. It's gone. Every cent. Used to grease wheels, buy influence, keep Caleb's career spotless. Your father signed withdrawals, your mother signed too." The words landed like a punch, but not the kind that left me gasping. This one lit me up from the inside, a raw, searing heat that clarified everything. They hadn't just dismissed me, they had stolen from me. My education, my independence, my future, the foundation I was supposed to stand on, had been gutted so Caleb could climb higher. So my parents could shine by his reflection. "This was supposed to be mine," I said, the words tasting of both grief and fury. "My education, my future, and they used it to grease wheels." Rick didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't empty, it was filled with understanding, with the kind of unspoken acknowledgement that this was no longer about hurt feelings or family drama. It was about theft. It was about betrayal written into bank records and signatures. The choice before me had never been clearer. I could walk away, swallow the truth like I had swallowed every slight before, and let them keep building their empire on what had once been my foundation. Or I could put it on the record, drag their secrets into the light, and finally reclaim what was stolen, not just money, but dignity. They didn't just hurt me, I whispered, my voice hardening as the decision crystallized. They built everything they have from what was supposed to be mine. I want it on the record. Saying it didn't undo the years of silence. It didn't erase the slap, the laughter, or the applause, but it shifted the balance. For the first time, my family's power wasn't absolute. I had the truth, and with Dana and Rick at my side, I had the means to use it. That night, I stopped being their shadow. I stopped being the forgotten freelancer who sat outside their glittering world. I became the woman who would drag every secret, every betrayal, every stolen dollar into the open. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt dangerous. Walking up the front steps of my parents' house that evening, I felt the weight of years pressing on my shoulders. Every childhood memory seemed etched into those bricks, the door I once decorated with crayon scribbles, the windows that had never opened for me when I needed shelter. Now, the house felt less like a home and more like a fortress of lies. I wasn't here as their daughter anymore. I was here as their reckoning. They had already prepared for me. My father sat stiff in his armchair. My mother perched nearby with her practiced smile, and Caleb leaned back as though the room itself belonged to him. On the coffee table lay a stack of papers, pristine and cold, an NDA. Their solution to decades of cruelty boiled down to silence with a signature. My father's voice carried the same arrogance it always had. Sign this, and we'll make it worth your while. You'll walk away with something. I looked at the pen resting neatly beside the papers, and then back at them. You think this is about money? I said quietly. My voice didn't tremble. It never was. I came here to give you a chance. You had it. Now it's gone. The color drained from my mother's face. Caleb smirked like it was a game he had already won. But then I reached into my bag and laid the small recorder on the table. It blinked red. Their eyes flickered with recognition. They knew what it meant. Every word, every veiled threat, every attempt to buy my silence had been captured. Their fortress was no longer impenetrable. The next morning, I met with Jenna, a journalist who had built her reputation on uncovering family and corporate corruption. She listened quietly as I told my story, her pen moving swiftly across the page. When I finished, she looked up, her eyes sharp. This isn't just a story about a dysfunctional family, she said. This is about abuse, theft, and betrayal at the highest level. People will care, Celine. They need to hear this. Dana was already drafting the legal filings. Within days, the trust documents Rick uncovered were officially entered into the record. Jenna's article went live the same morning the video from the party, unedited, unfiltered, hit the internet. My father's hand striking my face, my mother's laugh cutting through the air. Caleb's deliberate applause. It was all there for the world to see. The courtroom was where it all collided. Dana stood steady at the bench, her voice slicing through the noise with precision. She laid out the paper trail, every withdrawal signed by my parents, every diverted dollar tied directly to Caleb's career and the family's enterprises. The judge's expression hardened as each exhibit was presented. Then, it was my turn. I stepped forward, my hands trembling only for a moment before I steadied them against the wood. I spoke not just of the financial betrayal, but of the years of abuse that had paved the way for it. The slaps behind closed doors, the walls I'd been shoved against, the birthdays ignored, the dreams mocked. I didn't embellish. I didn't cry. I simply told the truth, the kind that had lived inside me for too long. When the gavel finally struck, the words felt heavier than steel. This court finds reasonable cause to open further investigation into possible criminal misuse of trust funds. Civil proceedings will be paused pending that review. The air shifted. For once, it wasn't me standing trial under their judgment. It was them. The fallout was swift. Clients who had once filled my father's calendar began to cancel contracts. Caleb's suspension from his firm was announced publicly, his once pristine reputation stained with scandal. The video continued to circulate, a stark reminder of who they truly were when no one was supposed to be watching. And me? I didn't feel triumphant. There was no surge of victory, no cinematic swell of glory. Instead, I felt still. Not peaceful, not angry, just still. Like something inside me had finally stopped spinning. For years, I had lived in their chaos, measuring my worth by their approval, shrinking myself to fit a space they would never grant me. Now, the noise was gone. As I walked out of the courthouse, the sky felt wider than it ever had before. Justice wasn't neat, and it wasn't painless, but it was real. My story was no longer trapped in silence. It was written in records, echoed in headlines, and carried by witnesses who could no longer pretend they hadn't seen. The girl who once stood alone with a forgotten painting, the young woman whose father laughed at her dreams, the sister erased from the seating chart, that girl was gone. In her place stood someone who had faced them all and refused to stay small. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the shadow. I wasn't the forgotten freelancer. I was the voice that exposed them. And that stillness I carried home wasn't emptiness, it was freedom. Later, as I held the necklace my mother once tore from my neck, I realized it no longer felt broken. It felt reclaimed, like a piece of myself finally returned. Standing before a room of strangers at a conference, I shared the lesson I had carried from my family's betrayal. Boundaries aren't walls to keep you trapped. They're doors, and you are the one who decides when to lock them. For the first time, my story wasn't about shame, it was about freedom. And maybe that's why you're here, listening, because every story has the power to open a door. If mine did, let it open yours too. Subscribe, like, and share, because justice deserves to be told.